What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Next Gen Sales Leaders Podcast. My name is Ben Reed, and I'm here with Aviv Joseph Glazer, who is the co-founder of Panda Match. Obviously, we have a lot to discuss. Panda Match is in an interesting space, especially with the way that the world is evolving around data, and especially around cold outbound. And I know you guys play in that space. So can you give people a 10,000 foot view about, what is Panda Match? Why is it relevant? And how is it different than anybody else in the space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, so if you're in sales and marketing, you can't really do much with your sales effort if you don't have the right data. So a really good analogy is data is the oil to your sales engine. So traditionally speaking, where we source our data from would be those mainstream databases like LinkedIn, ZoomInfo, Apollo. Um, However, a lot of those platforms rely heavily on adjusting the filters to industries and also like keywords, which had its own limitations. Um, and we're seeing this wave of AI coming through, which is drastically changing the way we put together our data, we build our list. So the difference between Panda Match is that we have our own proprietary natural language model, our own proprietary AI model. And where we source our data from is from the internet, from the website of these businesses. So it's not user generated content. It's not like someone can go in to their LinkedIn company profile and change their employee size to 1,000, employees, but realistically they have over like 50,000 or even less. They're a small business. It's coming directly from their proprietary data source, which is their website. So we crawl the entire internet. Every website that has a valid SSL certificate, and it's not like some random park domain, will be in Panda Match. So that's how we're able to find these companies that don't exist on LinkedIn and on Google Maps. So we tend to have more coverage. And then our AI model can take the context of the website. So we're basically looking at their homepage, the contact page, about page, and privacy page. And we're taking that context, and then our AI model will understand the concepts and offering, and we present it to the user as company data. So we look at some things that like, how old is their website, all the social media connected to their website, how many times they've updated their website. So we're actually quite literally tracking their entire digital footprint. So that's a much closer indicator of how, and it's a lot more accurate and more truthful as to how big the company is, rather than someone saying, hey, we make $10 million a year, and just like the user just input that data themselves, which is like easily manipulated. So yeah, that's really what separates us from the other data providers, that we're crawling the entire internet, and it's raw data. So it's not manipulated, quite literally looking at their entire digital footprint.
Mhm. So some follow-up questions there. So obviously we're talking about uh, data as a way of building out a list to provide many different types of people that would be interested in lists, such as cold outbound marketers, sales teams, anybody doing market research, product developers trying to get access to the right ideal customer profile. There's probably many people that want data. Obviously, there's a whole market around it. ZoomInfo, Apollo, Sales Navigator, Ocean.io, you guys, amongst many other thousands of competitors in the space for data. And the question is really, how do you get good data? How do you get up-to-date data? How do you get verified email addresses? How do you find cell phone numbers? All these questions everyone is asking themselves every single day. And I think that and I'm saying all this for setting the context for anybody listening here, because we're about to go deeper on this. And so you have to understand, if you're listening out there in the world, that we're talking about how do we curate good databases, and how do we ensure that the data is up to date and current and relevant. So obviously, we talked about how you guys go direct to the source. You're scraping these SSL certificates and you are pulling this into your database. Now, where somebody like LinkedIn, for example, is relying on user generated data, they're inputting their data into the system and that kind of thing. And then you have other tools like Apollo that seems to be also doing some type of web scraping. Do you have a sense of the distinction of where Apollo gets their data versus, say, ZoomInfo versus, say, you guys? Do you know the edges there?
Um, I have a hunch, and I don't even know if it's really a hunch because I'm pretty sure it's quite transparent that Apollo, even ZoomInfo, scrape LinkedIn data. That's part of the reason why Apollo got banned from LinkedIn. They violated their terms of services, and it was quite apparent that where they're getting their data from was heavily reliant on LinkedIn. Um, and I know this also from personal experience. For example, I'll change my role, but they're still hitting up old mobile numbers, old email addresses from where I used to work previously. So it's also, it's not even, it's old recycled data that they're pulling in from LinkedIn. And Apollo is primarily a B2B database, and LinkedIn is essentially a business platform. So it makes sense that they would get their data from LinkedIn. And then, yeah, they might have their own live data network where their users are inputting, company data, contact data, and then they may be able to collect that. But that eventually will get stale. And the thing about data is it's living because it's always changing. You need to constantly update it. So um, essentially where they get their data from is from LinkedIn. That's from my understanding. And then again, they have their own live data network where their user will just input, certain information. But the best way to get your data, I mean, as of today, is it's from multiple sources. And I think it's sort of like a double-edged sword where, yeah, like you can build a really nice, clean list. But the thing is, you have to go to multiple different sources. So you're being pulled in all of these different directions and it just becomes time consuming. And then at the end of the day, you're just like, I went through all of this work and all of this time to put together a list of only 1,000 contacts. Like,
Mhm.
what the heck? So that's part of the reason why. And it was a problem we were facing because I used to run a lead gen agency as well. So data was everything. And it just got to a point where, we were looking at every data tool under the sun. And then eventually we built our own data tool, worked on it for months and months. And it started working well for our clients. But the nature of email deliverability and just the nature and the relationship between agencies and their clients, it just wasn't fulfilling as much as it was actually providing a real solution and solving a real problem for those in sales and marketing.
Mhm.
So ideally, Panda Match will become this comprehensive business data tool for sales and marketing teams where they can find the companies, and soon we're going to be releasing contact level enrichment. So imagine being able to find companies that aren't on LinkedIn and also the contacts of decision makers that aren't on LinkedIn. So in my opinion, that's a huge game changer because now you no longer need to pull data from, Apollo or LinkedIn or Crunchbase, put that into your Clay table, use like a lead magic and a find email and a Prospeo, get their email. Now you got to figure out how do I get the job titled? It's just, you're being pulled in so many directions just to be left with a list of like 800 contacts.
Mhm. Yeah. I personally have experienced this. Again, to set the stage for all the listeners out there is that, if you're in B2B sales, let's say you're just getting started. Obviously, if you're a cold email agency or if you're somebody who's deep into this, like a CRO or a CMO, and you pulled many lists, this is a problem that resonates with you. But those that are just getting started, because I do have a certain amount of people that are less than $1 million in revenue, and they're pulling the first lists and they're putting together their first ICP targets, ideal customer profiles. And this is something that most people can't really understand until they try to do it, which is you do have your ideal customer profile and then you do have your total addressable market. But this is like the TM, SAM, SOM idea, which is you have like your
Yeah.
serviceable addressable market. And then you have the people that are in market. Some people call it the IICP, the in market ideal customer profile. And the thing with data is it's not just, the total addressable market. It is, okay, let's say there's 1 million people in the market, which is big for a B2B space, obviously. But let's just say that there is. Well, if you take out Outlook, for example, and we can't send to Outlook, some people don't do that anymore because of deliverability issues, for example. Well, you just cut that in half. So now it's 500,000. And then of those, it's like, okay, well, what percentage of them are even actually have a signature on the web where you can go find that data? So now you're down to 250,000. And then it's like, oh, but we're only actually talking about, people that specifically did this very particular activity. And to your point, as you add triggers and filters and all this stuff, you end up with a relatively small list. And it's a catch 22, whereas like if you're doing deep account-based marketing where you very precise laser focuses on multi-touch to 800 prospects and that's your world, fine, you can do that, but it's heavily sales led. It's not really cold outbound led from an email perspective because you just can't send that many emails without completely saturating the list. And so it's something that we have had a problem with at Next Gen Sales Leaders where you kind of have two buckets of customers. You have a size of customer that is a massive TAM, like a video production company that can serve any small, medium, large size business in the world. And they have hundreds of thousands of potential prospects versus you have some niche software that, like, for example, Wellsite Navigator, I'm a fractional CRO over there. They have on their new product a total addressable market of like 100 people. And so, there's a fundamentally different go-to-market motion if you have a small market versus a large market, and the list pulling becomes a completely different exercise depending upon these dynamics. And so, for a well site, for example, we've spent talk about data that's just not online. We're dealing with the niche oil and gas industry of people that work at small service companies that may not even have a website. And you need to find a direct dial phone number and an email for that guy to prospect them. Well, good luck. I mean, it doesn't exist. And so then you end up going to these very niche data brokers to then crawl the websites and then you try to pull the data that way. But I can say personally on Wellsite Navigator, it took me 3 years to fully saturate all the ICPs in the lists. So I think you're touching on a big problem. It's like the fundamental challenge of how do you pull solid lists without completely destroying a decent sized TAM, or if you have a small TAM, how do you go after people that aren't online? And that's kind of fundamentally what you're describing, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's true. And it's not only is it becoming more intricate to build these lists, but you're working with the same data sources that everyone else is working with.
Right.
So the same people are being hit up and they're just being completely bombarded with the same kind of outreach. And then you're just almost destroying the channel. And then you get people saying cold email is dead or cold calling is dead. But what if there was 50 or 40 to 60% of your market that you could access that just aren't on LinkedIn or on Google Maps? Like, for example, if you look at every law firm in the United States, especially with the way the world is today and how people work remotely, not every law firm or solo practitioner is going to have an office. You're not going to find them on Google Maps. And they're not always going to be on LinkedIn either. So if you're offering lead gen for lawyers and want to help them get clients, for example, how would you do that? Well, they're probably going to have a website, or they might have, an Instagram. So, these traditional databases, they're not going to have access to that data source. So it takes the number of people you can sell to and just shrinks it even more and
Mhm.
makes it even more saturated and that much more competitive. And now you have to think outside the box on how you can stand out. So it's really interesting. And because, you know, if you went to any sales rep and told them, hey, your TAM is 500 people and that's all the people you can sell to for the entire year. But they're going to be like, okay, like that's kind of hard. Like how many wins can I squeeze out of 500 contacts or 500 companies? But, you know, obviously if you went to them and said, hey, by the way, we just added like 300 more. Now you can sell to 800 companies. They're going to be like, holy crap, like pipeline just got way bigger. And I feel like when it comes to businesses, pipeline solves everything. The more pipeline you have, the more opportunities you have to generate revenue. So it's a big reason why a lot of sales leader out there will say the list is the strategy when it comes to doing outbound because
Mhm.
it's so important. Like, again, that analogy of data being the oil for your sales engine, like you can't have a car if you don't have that energy source. And
Mhm.
that's what your data is.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think that it all starts with the list. And in fact, it actually all starts with the ideal customer profile. And I think what's funny about list building is that people generally want to go broader because they're like, I need more people because of the issue that we just described, which is people run out of prospects essentially. And but the problem is there was a great post the other day on LinkedIn where it said something to the degree of like people want more prospects, so they widen their net. They basically have a more filtered, not a less filtered down ICP, so it's more broad. But in the process, you attract a more broad audience, and then you sell an offer that is more broad because it needs to be attractive to a more broad audience. And then you have more broad customers who are asking for more broad features, and you end up building a product or a service that is more broad to support all these people, but it's really not perfect for any one of them. So it's kind of like lukewarm. And so anybody who is more differentiated or more niche down on a particular ICP who goes, yeah, they do this, but we do this for you, in this very particular way, all of a sudden it's a much more powerful offer. And so you're easily disrupted, but also all of your product development and service development and your offer development becomes kind of watered down and less compelling. And your messaging becomes less compelling and it's a vicious cycle. And so then you're like, oh, we need more people because we're not getting more people. So then you go broader and it keeps on doing that. And so generally speaking, as a list builder, what I try to do is I try to not only come up with ideal customer profile, but I try to narrow it down is into the most detailed way possible. And I know Alex Ramosi talks about this deeply when he talks about the $100 million offers, and various people have said the same: niche down, niche down, niche down. But in high ticket B2B, it becomes even more important because when you get to the final stages of a $100,000 deal or $200,000 deal, and you're in the procurement office and they're trying to negotiate that final like $100,000 contract, it really comes down to, is there a viable alternative in the market that can compete with you? And I'm talking about a SaaS sale or a DaaS sale, data as a service sale here. And if you can say, well, no, there's not. This is the only thing that we offer that is completely unique and completely differentiated. And that's then start at the product level. That started all the way at the beginning of who are we servicing and what are we building for to solve that problem. But now it's a catch 22 to your point, which is if you do that, then you have a smaller market. And so then people freak out because they're like, okay, but now I can't just send a bunch of cold emails because I don't have enough people. And it's like, yeah, so change your tone. You have to be more account-based marketing. You have to be much more strategic in the way that you approach people. It's a much longer term development program of engaging with these people. You cannot come up with generic bullshit AI messaging. And you have to be much more careful. And that's like hard for people because everybody wants the AI system that's going to solve it all, and it just doesn't exist. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. And I think that in order to really grasp uh, list building, ideal customer profile, profiling, and all the things I just described, you really have to understand the essence of markets. You have to understand the essence of uh, how people buy and why people buy. You have to get back to the fundamentals, but people just want to not learn that stuff and just go, give me a list, man. And it's like the list isn't going to solve your problem if you haven't gotten clear on what you're offering and who you're offering it to. So I even go a step before the list, but 100%. If you get the list wrong, every activity downstream from that is completely a waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, especially in sales, especially outbound, there's like three pillars to doing it successfully. And it's, being able to reach your audience. So people would call that deliverability or reachability. Then you have the list building aspect, which is the targeting, where the data comes into play, and then the offer. So I almost you can't really create a business without looking at who you're going to sell to and come up. You can't really generate an offer without understanding who you're going to sell to. So, and you need that in order to run a business, because otherwise it's if you can only sell to a fraction of your market and your market's already pretty small and it's competitive and saturated, do you really have a viable business? Are you likely to succeed anyways? And then at that point, you're just scrambling to find, your fit in the market, product market fit, or if you're a service based, it becomes tricky at that point. So, it's almost fundamentally just taking a look at how the business is being run in the first place and seeing if they have a viable offer. So, but at the end, it's really the core of running outbound successfully. And I don't think I don't think outbound will ever die. It's so ingrained in our economy even. So yeah, it gets quite interesting, but it's also interesting to see how agencies are starting to transition into running a SaaS, for example, or, being in the data game. So yeah, I'm curious, have you noticed any transitions, from people running an agency into focusing on a very niche part of the market, or where they're just offering data? One person that comes to mind, you might know him, is Jordan Crawford,
I
for
don't
example.
actually know Jordan, but real quick, I just want to make sure. I just heard something power down and power up. I want to
Yeah.
make, was that, because I see that your microphone may have changed. Is that
I
right?
thought it did, but yeah, you're probably gonna have to edit that out. I'm gonna turn it off. So it was my speaker, and I was like, shit, did it just turn off? But I realized I had the headphones in. So,
Okay, so it's good because we're on the Yeti stereo microphone, and then we're on
and
the
that's,
headphone Bluetooth, and that's good.
yeah, that should
Okay,
be good. Yeah.
because I've had that happen midway, and then I listen back and I'm like, oh my god, there's an echo now, and because something happened midway through, it screwed everything up. But we're good to go.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. I just got a little bit confused. I was like, wait, why did it turn off? And is it going to come from my laptop speaker now? But then I realized I had the Bluetooth speaker in my
No
headphone.
worries. Yeah, that's an easy edit. I'm just gonna write down the timestamp, so I don't
Yeah,
lose
around
it.
maybe 23 minutes or so.
Yeah, 23 minutes.
You,
So
you haven't, sorry, go ahead.
no, can you ask that question again? Because I'm going to start from you asking the question because I want to make sure that I respond in the stream of responding to you because now I'm remembering what you said, but I don't want to misremember. So if you could
Yeah.
ask the question again.
Yeah, no worries. So it's something that I've been noticing just being in the agency space and, just being in sales and marketing and doing outbound for a long time. I noticed that because of how the nature of sales is changing, especially nowadays, it's changing so much. I noticed people that were once sales reps themselves or agency owners, where they were actually doing the work to provide leads and, top of the funnel. They would then pivot to, You see AI SDRs coming out, you see people coming out with new data tools, they'll transition into SaaS. I'm just curious if that's a trend that you're seeing as well.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's almost,
It,
yeah,
it's this is the dark secret, I think, that most people buying agency services don't really get, is that the turnover at most cold outbound email agencies is like 20 to 30%. Nobody will admit that, but that's just the truth. And I'm talking about like maybe they'll retain them for like an initial period and maybe an extra month, but then at some point it becomes apparent they're not getting the results they want. Yeah. And so the bottom line is that doing outbound successfully for a single company is hard, putting aside a whole slew of other companies. Uh, Now the question becomes, well, why is it hard? And the answer is actually in the discussion we just had, which is that if you haven't really chosen a solid market, like a not dying market that's decent, that has a good offer, differentiated offer, that has a TAM that is sizable, and then your expectations of velocity of pipeline and leads generated and deals closed is a expectation that is fair based upon those constraints. Well, then obviously you're gonna just fail because you think, oh my god, like I want to go become $1 billion company, but your TAM is like 100 people and your average order value is 10,000. It's like no, you're gonna run out of this in about 3 months, and you're gonna wonder why you're dying. And so I actually have a whole training called the What Matters training. And because I personally, about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I had this existential crisis around like I had started multiple SaaS businesses and DaaS business, data as a service businesses, where I brokered data, kind of like you're doing, but for the oil and gas industry. And I continuously ran up against the top of the TAM. There were just too little people, big problem to solve. And for those people, we did great, but we just ran out of people. And there was no tangential market to go to be like, oh, but you guys want this too. It's like nobody wants this oil and gas data. And so I made the cardinal sin of just choosing a market that was too small, even though there was a big pain. And so that's just like one mistake you can make. But then there's another mistake of, okay, you have a big market, but the problem that's being solved is a nice to have and not a must have. And so therefore you're competing against the top 10 priorities and you're 15th. And so the offer that's coming out to that ICP is like 15th on their list and they're just not prioritizing it. And so we have some clients, even right now, where we have to be very careful of client selection because if they have not thought through these dynamics of market selection and needs analysis and whether their price point is correct, all these subtle variables will dramatically impact whether or not somebody will be successful with outbound. And so where most agencies, most cold email agencies or any outbound agency or any outbound marketer working directly for a company itself, they'll make a mistake and they'll blame the outbound channel or whatever mechanism to generate leads and demand and not realize that there's something fundamentally broken about the dynamic that they find themselves in, which is the market sucks or the pricing sucks or you're pricing too low or you're completely commoditized and there's 20 other solutions out there that do that. And so you're eighth to market and your timing's off, right? And so these subtle kind of like first moves on the chessboard that people go like, oh, that doesn't matter. They'll make the move. And then they're complaining that they got checkmated 14 moves later. But the reality is they were dead from the start because they played the wrong game. And so that's like kind of obvious when I say it out loud like this, but it is so mind blowing because people will go 5, 6, 8 years in the wrong direction because they don't understand this. Uh, and cold email agencies, they're there to help people reach their dreams of more outbound lead generation. And they oftentimes are not smart enough themselves to make this distinction. And so they'll take on clients just because, oh, you want leads, you're willing to pay me? Sure, I'll do it for you. And then they can't actually get results because they're blocked by the same realities of the world. So yeah, man, I mean, I think that's the problem. And so what happens with agencies, to answer your question, is that a lot of like kind of entrepreneur type, by the way, I just want to be clear. I'm not putting you into this category. I just want to be clear because I put myself into this category too. But a lot of people that want to be agency owners, but then realize how hard it is. And they're like, fuck, we're losing all these people. And we are losing, we're rolling through clients and we're not able to get results. And they go, man, there's this one problem we have. Let's solve it for ourselves. And then they go solve that problem and then everyone else wants it. And it's such an easier thing. And then they jump to that. that's because that's the smart move to do. That's what makes sense, because for me too, I'm building a SaaS right now myself. So because it's just too hard to do cold email outbound for 40 plus companies consistently unless you have an extremely dialed understanding of everything I just said. You're very precise on the people that you take on, and you have an extremely militant, high level quality attention to detail for your operations. You have to run your agency like a SaaS. Uh, so the only way that we're able to do that at next gen sales leaders and outcompete these people, and I know this is a long-winded response, but the only way we can do that and not completely pivot to something else is because I have made it my life's work to become the most OCD person on planet Earth. And I have an 80-point checklist and, this very rigorous onboarding process and machine-like automation for my agency. And that's the only way I can do it. And it's still hard. So when you have these guys that are like three guys in a garage trying to do agency work, it's good luck. They're going to fail in 5 months. I think the final point I'll make on your question, because it's a deep question, is that there's a reason why Combinator likes to accept founders that are solving their own problem. Is because they deeply understand the ICP. They've been through the problem themselves. They understand the extent of the problem. They've tried to solve it themselves, which shows that there's a need. And so then when they go and launch a product like you did, there's more likely to be success because you're coming from a place of deep subject matter expertise and not from just guessing. And I think that's the smart move. I think any smart agency owner at some point finds or tackles a problem internally that they haven't been able to find external resources for in a good way. And they come up with a novel way to do it. And then people in their network say, hey, can you do that for me? And then it becomes kind of like a rolling stone, and they're able to make money off of it. So I'm with you, man. I mean, like, SaaS is infinitely better if you can make it work. The hard part is product market fit and choosing the right market. But if you have all that and you can come from a place of deep subject matter expertise, all the power to you. I'm doing it too, And so I think it is a trend, but I think it's a trend because of how hard running an agency is. And I think people just aren't up for that hard work, honestly.
Yeah. It's funny because we're using the word agency, which implies that you have a team and a whole suite of services. But
Mhm.
really, it's like you said, it's like maybe one person in their bedroom or three people in a garage, which, like, are you really an agency, or are you a glorified freelancer? Are
Right.
you, because an agency implied that there's an owner, and that owner should not be working in the business. He should
Mhm.
be working on the business. And
Mhm.
if that owner is working in the business, then it's not really an agency. It's just like another glorified sales rep or
Mhm.
another glorified sales, operations person. So it's interesting, but I have noticed that even like um, really even like successful agency owners, they at some point they start to pivot. They
Mhm.
either start offering coaching, or they'll offering, some kind of like community or like training.
Mhm.
And it to your point, it's a smart move. It's a smart move because there's always going to be a market for it.
Mhm.
And, that's why, like, it really depends on who you get your advice from. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, like depending on the position you're in, you end up getting this, like this wave of newcomers who just think that they could spin up, 100 inboxes, download instantly or smart lead or email bison these days, or Pipple or whatever, and then send a bunch of emails, and then they run an agency. But if you actually know what you're doing, that really separates the difference between what an agency is versus someone who's actually a glorified freelancer. But there's also something interesting that you brought up, and we kind of been talking about this, and it got my wheel turning because technically this is the first time I became a SaaS founder, or a co-founder, if you will. But prior to that, I tried to start another business where I would basically, sort of like white labeling, or rather reselling a crypto payment processor. And I
Mhm.
had gone and traveled to El Salvador right around the time they made Bitcoin a legal tender.
Mm.
And then I met my business partner there. And basically, like, there was a market for it because, crypto adoption started to gain traction. But the reason, like, I guess I didn't do my due diligence enough. And like the company that I was working with, where I was reselling their solution, they were one of the first to the market. They created a solution in like 2016 or 2017. But by the time it was 2021 and Bitcoin became a legal tender, there were 100 other solutions out there that were easier to use, had more, um, just had more functions and more features. And it just got to a point where, like, well, this is outdated tech at this point, even though it's only been a couple years. So it's interesting, even that whole idea of like product market fit. And I feel like it's almost this intangible thing. Like, how do you know if you have product market fit? Is, how much money you're making every year based on how much, that because you could have really good marketing. But if people fundamentally hate your product after using it for a couple of months and they churn, do you really have product market fit? I mean, some people would hate Salesforce, but they're a huge company. I mean, if you look at Salesforce, I would say they have product market fit, but if you look at someone that uses HubSpot, they're like, no, like Salesforce.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting. Like, I thought with Panda Match, we were getting product market fit, or we had achieved product market fit because we started to gain traction really quickly, and people were sharing people were sharing content organically.
Mhm.
So to me, that's like, wow, that's like a clear sign of product market fit. But then it got to the point where it was like, do I really have product market fit? Because it's sort of a nice to have when you're finding all these companies that aren't on the platforms, but it created a new problem where now they have to go find contacts
Mhm.
at those companies.
Mhm.
And what we were doing was basically pushing them to like Clay or pushing them to Apollo so they could find the contacts at those companies.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, they can't find the contact at those companies, even with their solution. So if I was a little bit stubborn and hard headed, I would just try to hammer down that point of like, you need to build your account list first. And I would just stick with our core solution. But part of the reason why we're pivoting is because people need contacts,
Mhm.
and a lot of people would say like, that's weak, or that's, you know, but in my opinion, that's like you said, it's smart to pivot. It's
Mhm.
smart to change your mind. It's almost like survival of the fittest. You either
Mhm.
adapt or you die. And
Mhm.
a lot of these companies end up going out of business because they don't adapt, and they end up sticking to what worked, you know, last year. And sometimes what worked last week or last month doesn't mean you're going to get new customers next week or the month after. So I think we should always be adapting, and I don't run my agency anymore because we pivoted to Panda Match full time. But part time, I do work with another agency and I help them with their client, like a handful of them. It's not like a whole lot of work. It's maybe like 5 to 10 hours a week, but it allows me to understand what's happening in the trenches,
Mhm.
like where are people getting their data from.
Mhm.
And because of that, I can understand the user better. So it's able to help me solve potential problems, which is at this point, Panda Match is providing a solution to find contacts for those
Mhm.
decision makers. So it's an interesting journey, and I like the internet is such a massive place, and billions of people use the internet. So surely there is a way to get contact information for these businesses that have a website.
Mhm.
But why isn't ZoomInfo doing that? Why isn't Apollo doing that? Why are they still limited to like 35 million companies only?
Mhm.
Why do they only have, a few 100 million contacts? Shouldn't there be like billions of contacts? So there are ways, and I feel like those solutions, only enterprise level companies have access to them. They have like, some broker that's like really expensive. Like, especially like for e-commerce leads, it's like really hard to find contact details, and also the businesses for like every Amazon seller, like every Shopify seller. Like, there's companies out there that will charge like almost $1 per contact, which is crazy. Especially if you're used to growth hacking and finding ways to get your resources in a much more cost effective way. Um, but I think even like just as a co-founder of a SaaS, even though we're relatively new, I'm starting to notice the importance of being agile and just adapting and seeing how the market moves and how they react. And like, even though I think I may have had product market fit, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll have product market fit tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you're touching on a lot of deep subjects, and I took a mental list of notes in my mind, and I'm going to try to remember them and respond to them. But they're important ideas, which is the first is product market fit, and there's so many different takes on this. The one that I always come back to, and I can't remember the guy who said it. I need to find the quote, but he said essentially, you need to ask your clients and your customers who are using the product, if I was to remove this from you today, would you be unimpacted, mildly impacted, or would it be extremely painful for you? Would it dramatically change your world in a detrimental way where you'd be screaming and kicking if I took it away from you? And in the output of this, and I'm paraphrasing, I might be bastardizing the idea, but the idea is if 40% of people, at least 40% of people don't say the last option, which is they'd be kicking and screaming, pulling it away from you, then you don't have product market fit. That's his definition. Now, there's other people have said more along the lines of what you're describing, which is like, okay, as soon as you get viral word of mouth growth where you're growing more and more month over month, and you're seeing that step function of all these different, the growth pattern where you get just word of mouth growth without any marketing, that's when you hit product market fit. So there's different like ideas around this. And then you brought up the point around like Salesforce, for example, is like where the product, I mean, anybody who actually uses that product, I don't think anybody who is not forced to use that actually thinks it's good. I was a Salesforce admin, spent a lot of time in there, probably spent 6 months of my life on the support phone line just to figure out how to like tie it all together back in 2014. Uh, and the data model for it is archaic. It's stupid. I don't know why they have this leads converted into contact opportunity, company thing going on. It's just strange. The whole thing just isn't good. And then the question is, well, how are they considered a market leader? If you look at any G2 crowd sites, they have the most reviews by far, double HubSpot. They're the number one rated system. And yet I think that they're the worst tool on planet Earth for anybody above, say, 300 reps. Maybe they're great because you can do a lot of stuff with it at the enterprise scale. But the question becomes, well, then why are they a market leader? And I think what happens once if you're an early mover and you become an early leader in a space, there's a kind of a zeitgeist, some type of momentum that starts to occur where uh, things start to get built around you that supports you as the main provider in that space. And a good example of that is AWS as a cloud infrastructure system. And if you ask most developers, hey, do you use are you in the AWS platform? Are you in the GCP platform, the Google Cloud platform? What are you in? And most developers, like 80-90% of them will say, oh, I'm expert on AWS. And the question is, well, why? Like, why do you use that versus GCP? Is GCP better or not? Now, if you talk to a lot of developers who actually have used both platforms, I know a lot that actually prefer GCP, Google Cloud Platform, for a number of reasons. And same thing with code stack. Some people use React, some use other Vue or whatever it's called, and they really live or die behind that. And the question is, well, why? Why do you do that? Is it because it's actually intrinsically better? And I think there's an interesting idea that somebody said about that relates to this, the answer to this question, which is think about the United States. There was a big fire over in the Palisades. I think I brought this up on another podcast where everything got burned down. And people are like, well, why didn't they just build with concrete, right? An obvious question. Why didn't they just build with something that was more fireproof? Why do you build with wood structures? And if you go into like the depths of that answer, it's because, well, there's a culture for a number of reasons why wood resources became the staple back in the day. It created a whole series of craftsmen around wood and people got good at it. So they hired employees that did that and they all went to trade school to learn that. And so the system itself reinforced the choice of a less than product. And so there's these cultural kind of human realities that force people into a certain paradigm. And I think the same thing happens with Salesforce. I think it's become so big and such a monstrosity that everyone hears about it. And so the first thing they do when they Google best CRM is, oh, Salesforce, look at the ratings, look how amazing it is. That's what everyone uses. If you don't know what to do, just go with Salesforce. And the unsuspecting poor small business owner falls into the trap face forward and goes, okay, now what do I do? This is impossible. And now they're 2 years into it and they finally kind of start to go, oh, that's not that great. And then you start to try other platforms, but then you try like Copper, maybe try Zoho a little bit. Oh, Pipedrive's the answer. And then you go through that ecosystem. And finally, after a lot of trials and tribulations, you fall on something that actually makes sense. And I certainly was that guy. I did that. It's not that I think that they have better product market fit than HubSpot. I think they just have a zeitgeist and an ecosystem that has facilitated their continual adoption. Now, coming back, because I'm going to finish one point real quick about what you said, which is that, when it comes to like, when do you pivot or when do you not pivot? And I think this kind of, I hate to keep on quoting Alex Ramosi, but he made a good point here, which is like, there's a couple of reasons people pivot. One is because there's actually a real need, like there's a real problem in the market and there's a competing forces coming out and you see a better way to do it. And so you outcompete yourself. It's the classic iPhone outcompeting the iPod where Steve Jobs was like, I'm going to put myself out of business because I see this coming. And so he preemptively, strategically made a good pivot. That's like a good example of that. Then there's the like more amateur kind of entrepreneur style pivot, which is like, this is Alex Ramosi's cycle of adoption, which is there's uninformed optimism, informed pessimism. So you come into a market where you're like, oh my God, I'm going to go be a cold email outbound agencies. All these guys are crushing it on LinkedIn. And so that's the uninformed optimism. They're like, we're just going to crush it. We have access to Clay. We have access to, Panda Match. We got all these tools. This is fucking easy, and they get in there and then they start to struggle. And they're like, oh, why did that perform that well? And so that's informed pessimism. And then they realize, oh my God, this is harder than I thought. I'm churning at a 20% rate. Why is this happening to me? And now they're in the valley of despair. And if they push through it and they persevere, they might come out to the informed optimism and then the achievement of being a market leader. But most people will run once they get to informed pessimism or valley of despair. And they're pivoting because it's hard and they didn't realize how hard it was. And they see another shining object and they start again at the uninformed optimism. So there's different ways to pivot. Now, some of them are legitimate and some of them are fear-based and are actually causing you to run in circles. And so the question that I would say for anybody is like, why are you doing it? But Alex Ramosi actually has an interesting idea, which you're touching on, what you guys are doing with the contact level stuff, which is when he comes up with the $100 million offer, he describes, okay, you want to come up with all the problems a customer has, list them all out. Like every single one. Well, how do you do that? You have deep conversations with your ideal customer profile. You do what you're doing when you're in the agency. You're listening to them and you're hearing them and they're saying, this is one of my problems. So what you can do preemptively, even before you go to market generally, is just go list all those problems and then create sub problems relating to this. And I just did this whole free giveaway on this with Alex Ramosi's offer creation. And once you've done that, once you have the sense of all the problems, then you can come up with the solutions and you can start to list all the solutions. Now, the real trick here is that you have to solve the problem of before they buy from you. What's the objection in their mind? As they buy from you, like they just bought from you, after they bought from you, and then once they solve the first problem, what's the next problem they want to solve? So yours is a perfect example of this where you're like, well, shit, we got to get account-based lists down. And so you solve the problem of, okay, I need this problem solved. I need this account list. But what's the very next problem that they have to solve? Contacts, right? And so it's actually, I would, if I was advising you from the get-go, I would have said, well, that's going to be a natural follow-up. So let's actually strategically and preemptively handle that. Now, would I jump in and go build the feature? No, I would go talk to agencies and say, hey, after I have this account list, what's the next thing that you're going to try to solve for? And they're going to say contacts. So it all makes sense to me. And I think as long as people think about it through that framework of what's the biggest problem, are the people aware of it? And what is the next logical problem to solve? And make sure that that's built into the roadmap. And as long as the mousetrap is 10 times better than anything else on the market, then I think you're going to succeed if there's demand. And that's where Elon Musk, likes to say, like Elon Musk's actually a very simple go-to-market strategy is choose a massive demand with a huge problem and make something 10 times better. That's like his formula, but it's really hard to do. And what happens with most people, and the reason most companies suck is because they create shitty products with shitty offers with a 8 number problem on the list, and they don't actually develop something comprehensive that's unique. So that's a long-winded response to what you said, but I've thought deeply about this exact subject, and that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and it's exactly the journey I went through as we were launching Panda Match. It's like, okay, we got our companies now. What do we do next? And our natural next step was, okay, cool. Like we built out this, push to Apollo integration or push to Clay to integration, push to Instantly, but not everyone knows how to use Clay. Especially if you're like a boomer that's in real estate and wants to find, custom home builders. Like they don't know how to use Clay. Or if you're selling like, to roofing companies, for example. So that's exactly where we're at right now. And it just makes sense for us to solve that problem and sort of become that end-to-end solution. And it's also something a lot of agencies owners will experience as well when they realize that cold email is a way to get your foot in the door in the sales process. And then you'll start to see more mature agencies add on cold calling, add on CRM enrichment. They'll add on paid ads as they grow. So or even, they might even handle the hiring of setters or the hiring of closers. So, and that's what I've noticed, especially the agency that I'm helping out. They started off as a cold email agency and they still have that. It's still a fundamental part of their business, but they've expanded and added in CRM build outs. They hire setters, they hire closers, and then they get into this position where they actually own the sales department and they're solving a real problem for their clients, which is really the reason why any company would work with the lead gen agency is to generate revenue. It's not to get positive replies. Like at the end, yeah, you might get a couple dopamine hits, but at the end of the day, you have a business to run, you have a family to feed, you got to put food on the table, and it's to generate revenue. So, and even, part of the reason why I started out with Panda Match is to solve fundamental problem where, not everyone wants to sell to B2B SaaS companies on LinkedIn. It's becoming saturated. So, it's really interesting just seeing how everything is unfolding and how we're pivoting. And I almost feel like it's like how you do it, it means everything and your intention behind it. If you're pivoting just to sort of like escape, you're probably going to end up back at square one with that same fundamental problem. So, it's just it's an interesting journey, but it's exciting and it's fulfilling. Especially my first time being a SaaS founder and just seeing the impact it has on our users. It's like kind of like what you said earlier, like they can't really live without your solution. That might be a sign that you have product market. If you take it away from them, can they essentially survive without it? And if the answer is no, they can't survive, then you're probably doing the right things.
Yeah, it's always about the viable alternative. And a viable alternative is oftentimes not the competitive third-party solution. It's oftentimes your Excel spreadsheet and you're like, manual download as a CSV and passing it over via email. Like, you know, it's people often forget that we're not just competing against what we call competitors. We're competing against people's internal processes and systems.
Exactly.
So yeah, and that's where Clay is an interesting example of that, because Clay created a system that before it was there, it there you weren't able to do what you can now do without deep level data engineering technical skills and integration skills. So they basically commoditized the way to uh, pull and enrich data in a waterfall without being a full stack developer, or at least a backend developer. And so now you have these people that are low code, no code. Some are developers, but you take away Clay and they're done. I mean, they're gone. So it becomes a critical tool in their chest. Same thing as if you take a designer and you say, okay, you don't get Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and that's the tool that they become proficient in, then they're done. I mean, what do you do? For example, I use Close.io as a CRM, and I do the same thing that sounds like your agency that you're supporting does, where I also recognize that revenue. I was always a CRO, VP of sales before I was a demand gen guy. And I started, 13 companies. And so that's all I cared about was the revenue. I didn't give a shit about how we got there. And I also found the same thing, that, you have to focus on everything post lead capture. And that's where most of the cost is. And you have to put a CRM in place. So I went through the journey I described earlier, and I was like, Salesforce, HubSpot, what is it? And I came upon Close. But now I'm in a situation where it's like, Close is so important to me that if you take away Close, I have to redo all my materials. I have a 100+ page training guide on CRM, sales ops, automation, and build out that we give to our clients. We have a done for you and a done with you service. And if you take away Close, done. Like, it's like I have to literally go find another tool, recreate all that training materials, come up with new integrations and systems. All my automation methodologies goes out the door. So for me, very tight product market fit with Close as an example. But one thing I wanted to hit on real quick, because you were mentioning it around about, people just care about revenue. What people, the shiny syndrome, the shiny syndrome of the shiny object syndrome of the cold email is it's so interesting to me, because when people come to me at Next Gen Sales Leaders, they don't realize that, like, I'm really good at selling $1 million plus deals. I've built multiple businesses literally through my own sales plus $1 million many times before, but they're really only interested in hearing what I have to say about cold email. And I'm like, you're actually asking the wrong question, but I'm going to answer the question because that's what you seem to be focused on. And so this is a good example of the awareness scale, which is like, people are very problem aware of lead generation, but they're not really problem aware of the thing that matters is sales operations and a systematic way to move people through post lead capture. And the really interesting idea is that if you look at a cost to acquire analysis, because I think the most fundamental basic metric in business is cost to acquire to LTV. That's it. If you get that, again, Alex Rosie, if you get that on a service-based business, like 10-to-1 LTV to CAC, then you can scale. Anything less than that is really just not a great business, or it's like just lifestyle business. And so I deeply look at LTV to CAC, lifetime value. So you have to go through all the little units of the cost to acquire. So in cold outbound, that means, okay, I have to know all of my costs on my infrastructure, my email, all my costs on my software, all of my costs on my human capital, whether that's agency or internal. I have to know all my costs on my leads, like the list that they pull. And then I have to understand my costs on my salespeople, and then what the conversion rate is on the top of funnel input, which is all that email purchasing and all that stuff. And then how is that conversion funnel from first sends to replies to interested replies to meeting set to meeting held to qualified lead to proposal sent to term sent to close. There's little fall offs along the way. And if you actually do this analysis like I've done, you'll find out that if your average cold email lead costs around $300, and that's across clients for us. I've seen leads cost $3,000 for very top tier one clients where you're going after the CEO of Walmart. But on average, it's around $300 to $400 a pop. And then you work through the conversion funnel. Your cost to acquire is around $3,000. And if you think about that, that means $2,700 of the $3,000 cost to acquire came post lead capture. It came because of a breakdown in conversion, post lead capture, which is revenue operations, and post lead capture sales optimization. And so I'm like, if you really want to optimize your cost, don't worry about the leads. Get a really dialed process to move people through that with a really easy offer to sell. And so there's a lot more that you can say there, but it's just interesting how people get myopically focused on, I need more leads. And yes, you need more leads. But if you have a great lead capture system, but they're all being bottlenecked because you have a fundamental misunderstanding of how to follow up from meetings, well, you're throwing out 80% of the value. So I'm with you. I think that most smart agencies do what you're saying. They do go deeper into the revenue operations world. They do deeply understand CRM integrations. They deeply understand CRM setup and sales process. The problem is most cold email bros are, guys in their mid 20s who this is like their first or second business ever. They've never done any level of high ticket enterprise B2B selling other than selling their agency service. They have no idea how to put together a buying committee or how to lead a big sales demo with 30 people on it, with a CEO of Fortune 500. And so they're just talking out of their ass. And so it's kind of this interesting dynamic is that, yes, the smart guys do go in that direction, but they are not qualified to be speaking about it. So that's where anyways, I said a lot, but that I agree with what you're saying.
No, it's so true. And that was something I experienced with a lot of the clients I had when I was running the agency. And I made it very clear to them as well. I would always tell them, like cold email is not a silver bullet. It doesn't mean you're going to generate revenue. You still need to have a dialed in sales process. Once you've captured the lead, what do you do next? What is your process from there? And they think, oh, we need to have like 7 to 8 demos or we just need to make sure we get, 100 leads a month. And even if you were to get them 100 leads a month, they still didn't know what to do with the leads. So it's so true. It's so true. And I almost feel like a lot of these agencies, they're just selling this like, imaginary golden ticket that doesn't exist. And a lot of these owners and founders, they just fall for it because they see, because on the call, they'll pull up their campaign that show them that they're getting 30 positive replies and a 40% positive reply rate on their campaigns. That there's really easy ways to, be enamored. And it's kind of like they have this shiny object syndrome, like you said. So but it's the people. Like it's interesting how the more mature you are and the bigger and the more successful you become with your business and your agency, like you're able to pick these things out and notice them and then realize like this is actually not worth my time. And then they actually disqualify them. But there's almost like this interesting psychological dynamic where the moment you start to disqualify them, they start to qualify themselves because they're so, mesmerized by this movement happening and they want that shiny object, but they're not set up. They don't have the infrastructure set up to handle that type of growth. And they end up burning more cash, burning their money, and end up in almost a worse position than when they started.
I think that the key, this is now I'm speaking to cold email agencies out there, and this is speaking to my competitors too. It's like the number one skill you can have as a cold email agency is client selection. It really is, because if you get that right, then everything becomes easier because you're choosing a client that has a good ICP that has a decent TAM, and you ideally have done it before. And then all of a sudden the offers are known, the way they typically behave, the post lead capture sales funnel is typically more clear and repeatable. And so all the things become more well understood. The problem that most people do is they go after 30 different ICPs and they just take anybody who finds them, and they just take them on. And I can say, I'm one of the Instantly experts on the Instantly page. So I get a lot of random people. Yeah, everyone and their brother. So like somebody who just got the brand new thing, they have zero revenue, to the guy who's doing $50 million. And I have to be a fiduciary to these people on the call. And I tell them within 10 seconds, I'll say, okay, tell me about your TAM, tell me about your ICP, tell me about this. Do you have a sales team? What, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, you're not a good fit to work with me. And here's why. And I'll explain the rest of the time, what I think they really need, and why I think they shouldn't do cold email, or they should do cold email. But I'm extremely particular. In fact, like we had a person reach out to us, I think even yesterday, who was like, I'd been chasing them for months to close a deal. But I said to them, look, I can't commit to you until I look at your ICP more thoroughly. And I'm still not clear on who they are. So you need to send over an example. So they sent it over finally. And then I took 2 weeks to get back to them because I'm like, I'm not going to say yes to this contract uh, until I'm clear that I can actually pull this list. And because again, I don't want to commit to something that I know is going to be impossible, even if I can sell them on it. So I do all that, and we did check the list and we could take on the client. But as soon as I was like, I don't know if we can take you guys on, let me check. All of a sudden they're calling me every day and they haven't been responsive at all. But I think the truth is that to your point, every B2B marketer and salesperson right now is hearing about Clay. They're hearing about Instantly. They're hearing about these outbound motions using AI written email, and they think it is the messiah, and they don't want to be left behind. Now, if I wanted to be just a slimy sales guy, I can sell that story. Hey, there's big changes in the market. Apollo is da, 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 deliverability is down, but you need this AI, blah, and I can tell that story. And frankly, I do tell that story, but I tell that story with a very clear asterisk. But it only works if you do, and you have this size of market, and you have this type of maturity on your product, and this type of maturity on your sales team. Because the truth is I have talked to many people, many sales guys who have sold people out of business, which is a weird thing to say. It's like, okay, too many sales. Why would that be a problem? Well, if your product is broken, if your service isn't fulfillable, if you don't have scalable systems internally, why are you turning on a demand gen engine? You have to solve those things first. So that's where the what matters world is actually, that's my whole diagram of like, everyone thinks it's a lead problem. I'm like, no, it's not a lead problem. It's a product market fit problem. It's a offer problem. It's a quality of product problem. It's a sales operations problem. It's a bunch of problems, and you got to get them all right. Otherwise you're going to screw up. And it's like any point of leverage. Somebody said this, I think it was, what's that guy's name? The guy who founded Quest Nutrition. I can't remember the guy's name, but
Tom
Bilu.
Bilyeu?
Yeah. Bilio, whatever his name is. Yeah.
Yeah.
He said something that was interesting. We've heard the kind of, if anybody who's in the entrepreneurial circles has heard this statement of like, it's all about points of leverage. And so what are the points of leverage? Is you have capital, you have human capital, you have content, you have technology, and you have a list, you have an audience of some sort. So those are the points of leverage. And so he says, well, look, at this point, anybody who's in the game kind of knows that, but the real hidden leverage is actually not any of those. It's actually judgment. It's discernment, and it's the ability to know which lever to pull at the right time, because any one of those points of leverage can actually sink the business. So for example, if you take on capital too quickly and you dilute your cap table and you have too much money in the bank, but you don't have product market fit, then that can actually cause massive problems, which we could spend 30 minutes talking about. And likewise, if you, I don't know, let's say that on the human capital side, you overhire on the sales side before you get product market fit, and now you're selling a product that's fundamentally flawed, and you're just churning out of people, and people are bitching, and it's ruining your brand. Well, you added a lever point of sales, but you actually added a lever point that hurt your business. Same thing with technology, is that you over process things, and you over automate things, but the process is fundamentally broken, and it's not what you actually need, and you just build 6 months of code and $200,000, and you realize you went in the wrong direction. So now, so it's like all of these things are critical, but you have to choose the right lever at the right time. And I think that's where, when it comes to advising people about cold email or not cold email, the question is, okay, cold email is a superpower if you have all these right things in place. But if you're not ready for it, it's just a waste of money and effort. So.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm starting to realize, because, as you were talking, it got my wheels turning, and that like even you turning away clients because, they don't really understand their ICP, or if they don't have the right TAM, it's an entirely, but if you backtrack, they went to you because they found you on Instantly's website. You're an expert, and they on some level they're aware of Instantly, and they see how easy it is to send cold emails, and people are seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars being built in pipeline, and they want that. They want that. They think they have a lead generation problem, but what they really have is lack of market research. They don't have product market fit, which is an entirely different offer. But no one wants to sell a market research service. They want lead generation because that's what's sexy right now. And it's the same reason why it's why you have, like, for example, like, it's a random analogy, but like, these different food products, they'll just say they're gluten free just because they're like, obviously it's gluten free, it has nothing to do with gluten free, but it sounds sexy and it's going to make people want to buy it. So it's just interesting how the culture around sales and marketing it's completely taken over. But it's a wildly different service when you're starting out versus just generating demand, generating leads, because it's more than that. You're actually validating if you have a real business or not. And if you don't have a real business, then what are you going to do with your leads? You can't really do much if you don't have a proper sales process in place. So it's interesting. And I feel like, we can go on and on about it, but it's the same reason why the business owners are being bamboozled, and simultaneously we're seeing a low barrier to entry, and we have 20-year-olds in their bedroom spinning up campaigns, spinning up a website, and then calling themselves an agency owner and taking on these clients just because they're throwing money at them. But really, like, they're not really solving the problem that they need, depending on the stage of their business. So, it's just interesting, just even hearing your process of like how you will disqualify them. And then even when you take your time to study them and see if they're a good fit, they want it even more. So it's like I don't know. It's so interesting to see. And it's such a dynamic economy where you have, like, the way it's growing, like even the culture behind it, it's fascinating. But I feel like it's almost a facade in a lot of ways. And this facade and this story that's being told is what's tricking people and changing their buyer's behavior. But at the end of the day, like, people buy from each other because they trust each other. And sometimes when you're, like, misinformed, you're desperate to find answers. So then they end up going with the 21-year-old agency owner because he knows how to set up DNS settings and, get some inboxes and send some emails, but he doesn't know how to properly validate your business. He doesn't know, he hasn't asked you about your sales process. He doesn't know what you're going to do once you've delivered the lead. He doesn't understand the importance of speed to lead, or how you're running your demo calls, or, what are you doing with that contact information once that lead comes through? How are you going to follow up with, hundreds of leads over X amount of time? So it just opened up a huge can of worms that they didn't even realize that they're not ready for.
I know I brought up Alex Ramosi. It sounds like I have a hard on for him, but I'm going to say one last thing, because I was at his event called the Scaling Event, and his main lesson from the entire event was the number one role of a CEO. And I would even go further and say the number one role of any leader of any part of an organization is to find the biggest constraint and then solve for it. And so everything we've just discussed today, if you're like making kind of a principle or a framework around it, which is like, everyone thinks in the cold email space, or if you're looking for any type of outbound effort, is that the constraint is actually lead volume. And the constraint is potentially many things, right? And it's not as simple as, oh, leads or not leads. It's price point, it's offer, it's market size, it's post lead, post sale delivery mechanisms. So that's why I just really encourage people to think more critically about all the pieces of the puzzle, and not just get completely wrapped up in this, like there is one silver bullet or one lever you can pull, because just because it's a lever and just because it works sometimes does not mean it's the right one for you. And so your ability to have, again, Tom Bilio, whatever his name is, the good judgment is to be able to accurately, as a leader in the business, to identify the biggest constraint and then allocate resources to solve for it. But the first thing is accurately identify. And so for me, I have just made it a business. It's my business model to, I do that for my clients, because the truth is, and this is like a hard truth to say, is that most clients, most CEOs, most CROs, most directors of marketing have really poor judgment, even though they're in those positions. And I hate to say that. I'm just saying that because I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of them, and they're just human, just like us. Most people are not as obsessive about this type of stuff as, someone like me or maybe someone like you are. And this is their day job. They make mistakes, they go home to their families, and they kind of put it to rest. And they don't think really deeply and philosophically about these issues. And consequently, they get eaten up by the market. They make poor decisions, they make bad buying decisions, and then they, churn out of the job, or they do bad for the business, and everyone's pointing fingers. So for me, I try, because I think about this so much and I've gone through this cycle so many times, I personally just make it a duty of mine to be their fiduciary and say, yeah, you think that's the lever, that's not the lever, look over there. And then we try to align strategically. But that cost me a lot of money. I mean, I could have, if I wanted to, I could have probably sold another couple $1 million in revenue just by saying, sure, we'll do the pilot with you. Here's a couple, here's $20,000, come on board, just knowing that they would churn out. But I can't sleep at night doing that, because one, it's like my goal is the mission here is to get $100 million for our clients in 2025. And I'm not going to do that if I'm just BSing. So
Yeah.
I have a fundamental core belief, which is integrity, unimpeachable character. And so that's where I just tell everyone, don't be scammed by some guy that knows clay. And the final thing I'll say is, we had one of our clients, they were paying us a $25,000 a month retainer. We were doing the full works for them, RevOps, you name it. And then midway through, and they were on the path to RevOps success. It was like so close. I had installed Close, got their whole SDR team who wasn't making any cold calls on there. And I was about to make them make cold calls. And then they came back to me and they were like, we just want to cut out the RevOps side. And I'm like, any outbound motion takes at least 6 months, if not 12 months to be successful. And you're cutting me off after 2 months or whatever it was. And I'm like, your time horizon is unrealistic. But they wanted to continue with the lead generation, but they said, we want to do a specific performance-based model. So we went from, it was, I believe it was 10,000 on the lead gen, and it was 15,000 on the RevOps side. I don't remember the exact dynamics of the contract, but we reduced everything down to $4,000 a month with this bonus to get above that. And the reality is that because of their TAM and because of the nature of the market, we were only getting them, which was by most standards pretty good, around 25 to 30 meetings per week. Now they wanted to get to 50 meetings per week. And we're like, look, your TAM does not support that volume. Like, it just doesn't. And given the reply rates right now, which used to be 6%, but because of fingerprinting and the market dynamics, it's fallen to like 2.9%. This is just the reality of what you're dealing with. And they couldn't wrap their minds around it. But they didn't realize that now that we're performing in the, say, $6,000-$7,000 a month range, it doesn't actually cover the cost to do the real serious work to build the list that they need. And so we're basically having like a 0% margin to run that whole thing. And so then they bring in a guy and a new guru. Again, this is the uninformed optimism. There's a new guy that's going to save us. And this guy's like a 27-year-old guy who just learned clay. And they come in and they're hired for the RevOps side. They're hired for the lead gen side. And I said to them, guys, you're making such an obvious mistake here. This guy has never run a sales team before. He's never done RevOps before. And you think just because he's the new guy, he's going to solve it. But you didn't let us finish the fucking job in the first place. And now you are gutting us on the price point because they thought that that would solve it. And it was such a perfect example. And I'm saying this out loud. I'm not going to name names with them, but I'm saying this out loud for everybody listening, that if you are not giving your outbound motion a 6 to 12 month period of time with the right provider, then you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're doing probably the right thing, but not enough of it. Last Alex Hormozy point that I'll make, and then we can stop, which is he has this idea of better or more, better, new. More, better, new. And it's a great framework because oftentimes people go, I want new. Like something's not working, I want new. And his whole idea is that it's almost always more, and it's almost, if not more, it's almost always better. It's rarely new. And that's a really important framework that people don't get. And so these guys were actually doing the right thing. They had the right rev ops in place. They were doing the right thing on the lead gen side. They were getting the best results that we've seen. I mean, they were crushing it. But it wasn't up to their expectations. And so they went, well, we're not going to do more of this. We're not even going to just do better of this. We're going to just immediately pivot and go new. And so they made the cardinal sin. And so for me and anybody else listening is that if you are a good fit for outbound and you do take on a vendor, and you have to give them time to work with you to work it through. So anyways, that's the end of the story, but it's a good example of all these little frameworks of making decisions of what constraint to solve for. When should you give up? When should you persist? All of this comes down to judgment. It's all about having these background operating models in your mind to help drive you as an entrepreneur. And I think the ones that succeed, to quote Jeff Bezos, are the leaders that are right a lot. That's the difference between success and failure. And how do you be right a lot? Well, you fail a lot and you make a lot of mistakes. And I'm a good example of that. 13 businesses, I failed at most of them. And I've made every stupid mistake you can make on planet Earth, but I've seen it 1,000 times. So I can now have an opinion. So anyways, I don't know if that's worth anything to you, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Yes. And people always think that they cut out that part of their business and they went with the new, that new way of doing things. They got caught up with the whole shiny object syndrome. They saw this guy, he learned clay. He promised them, the sun and the moon, but at the end of the day, he still will need to solve that problem of having.
Well, that's the thing is that guy comes to me. So near the end of the engagement, I had to help make the transition, and he comes to me and he says, "Hey, this seems like really hard. Like, I don't know if we can do this. How are you doing this?" And I'm like, "It was really hard. I have a whole 100-page methodology of how I was doing that. And good luck." It's like, good luck. Because it's like we were doing it and we were doing the best you could do it. And they weren't understanding that the constraint wasn't your expertise. And it wasn't the tactical buttons we were pushing. We were pushing the right buttons and we were doing the right thing. The issue was they had market size constraints, and they also had constraints internally that they weren't solving the real problem, which was post lead capture, follow up. And then also they weren't doing any outbound prospecting with phones. And they had no social DM strategy. They had no social strategy whatsoever. And so everything we wanted to push them to, which we saw as the biggest constraint, they were so hyper-focused on cold email as being the messiah that they didn't realize they were making a mistake. And so when the new guy came in, and he actually said to them, we have a rule at Next Gen. We have many principles. One of the principles is no advice without context. We will not tell you one way or another how to do something specifically if somebody asks us, unless I deeply understand the context, because otherwise you're just guessing. Because one piece of advice can be right for one person and completely wrong for another, even though it seems similar. So this guy comes in and he immediately says, "Oh, they have the wrong CRM. They should never have put you on Close. You need to be back on HubSpot." And I'm like, "Do you know why we put them on Close?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Do you know how Close works?" "No." "Okay, have you ever used Close?" "No." "Okay, so then why the hell are you saying they should rip out something you know nothing about?" So that's like the kind of example I'm talking about, where you have to be careful about who you let in your court. And it feels like the Game of Thrones sometimes when you go into these clients with the politics that goes on, because you have 5 people whispering in the ear of the decision makers, and everybody has an opinion, but you have to ask yourself, are you talking to somebody who truly understands and is knowledgeable, or somebody just a guy that got anointed because you made a bad decision and now you're listening to the wrong guy. So there's a great quote of the number one reason A players leave companies is because of B players. People
True.
just don't like to work with bad people. And so it's all about leadership. It's all about choosing the best people, choosing the best lever to pull. But it's all a judgment call. And that's where the hardest problem is that 99% of human beings, entrepreneurs included, have poor judgment. And that's why there's the cream of the crop and there's those that are not.
Yeah. It's so true. It's almost fascinating just like having this conversation and realizing how clouded people's judgments are.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that would just come to ego in a lot of ways. So, it's almost like you exercise too much of your ego and then you start offering advice, even though you don't really have context, but you sound like you know what you're saying. But when it comes to actually delivering or actually, you're presented in a situation where you have a real problem and you have to solve it, that's when reality hits you.
Mm-hmm.
And, it sounds like this particular client is in that position where he doesn't have access to you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he's left with this guy who maybe just finished the clay boot camp and knows how to use clay. But now he has a real problem and he's suggesting they use HubSpot where, I wouldn't suggest any SDR working out of HubSpot really. And Close. I haven't used Close personally, but they've got a solid, from my understanding, they've got a solid system in place you can also use them. Like I know a lot of people that use them almost as like a master inbox. And then for the SDRs to make calls, like I'm pretty sure they have a power dialer.
Yeah. Power dialer, automations, everything.
So if anything, it's the perfect CRM, and that's exactly what they should be on. But maybe they just think HubSpot because Clay has a neat integration with it.
And it really doesn't. So we offer a integration with HubSpot between Clay and HubSpot, and also with Instantly in HubSpot. And the fundamental problem with the Clay integration is that, and the Instantly integration, is that there's an API timeout where you send too much data and the API times out. And then you have HTML email bodies or just data kind of left in limbo. And there's no error retry logic, at least not the last time I looked. And in order to have an error retry logic, you have to have a central database to store the data on the webhook and then wait to see if it got pushed and then check. And that doesn't exist. And so although the integration works from the Clay side, it actually gets timed out on the HubSpot side. And then you have this error without error logging. And so it becomes problematic. So we actually solved that at NextGen. It's a service we offer internally through a tool called ReviOps. But the thing is, I'm not saying HubSpot doesn't have its place. I think HubSpot is great from a marketing standpoint. And you certainly can use HubSpot. We have many clients that use HubSpot and we integrate with HubSpot and we know HubSpot deeply. But for this very specific purpose of cold outbound SDR motions, where you have to have multi-touch text messaging, emails, phone calls, and all of those things, HubSpot is horrible. And the reason it's horrible is because of what I call the unit economics of the salesperson, is that if you ever try to use Zoho or any of these other tools, the Salesforce, you are literally waiting for pages to load just to get between very standard objects from the data model between, the opportunity and say the contact and say the company. And so every little load, every little click, every little extra scroll you have to make adds switching costs to a person. And so it's loading for a little bit. Oh, I'm going to check my phone. Oh, it's doing that. I'm going to look away. Right. And I've literally watched people and I've done contests between Close and HubSpot where you can make 300 dials in Close easily on the auto dialer and power dialer, where you can only make 50 in HubSpot. And then you hear these SDR leaders being like, my quota is 50 calls per day. And I'm like, how? I'm like, why? I'm like, if you have a good list building mechanism and a decent TAM, and you've done the list and you have good cell phone records and they've been loaded properly into a power dialer, why can't you make 200 calls a day? And the answer is because you don't have a good list, you haven't preloaded them, you didn't pre-qualify the data, you're making all your SDRs do this manual research, and they're not using a power dialer in a crappy system like HubSpot for outbound calling. But nobody will tell you that if you're just evaluating HubSpot. And so then you get somebody like this guy coming in who's never made a phone call in his life, has never been an SDR. And now he's telling us how we should structure the user experience of the SDR. It's wild to me. So I have a strong opinion about this, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, totally. And I can imagine there's so many companies out there that deal with this exact problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on who you're taking advice from, because if you're coming from, so let's just say like this guy's more of a new age kind of GTM wizard kind of guy, clay guy. And then you have an old school kind of SDR, CRO type of guy. And then you have like a CMO type guy that's more marketing led. And then you have a product led guy who does no sales or marketing. It's all about product virality and product market fit. You talk to every single one of those people, depending upon who the leader of the revenue team is. And all those people technically could be, depending upon who you favor and what your bias you have. You're going to have wildly different go-to-market motions. And the perfect person that you really want is somebody that can do all of that. You want somebody who can be a CRO, CMO, GTM guy, and also has built products. And so for me personally, I've been a product manager at 4 different companies at this point. I personally led dev teams on the product management. I personally been a CMO, so I did all the marketing. I've been the GTM guy, the clay guy, and the instantly guy. I've run SDR teams, and I've been the CRO. I've done them all. So you want someone with that type of experience because they're not biased. They know all the bullshit, and they're going to be, look, there's a right answer for the right time, depending upon scenarios. And that's why context is so critical. And I'm not saying I'm a special butterfly. I think there's other people like me, but I think people just make really poor decisions because they rely on these kind of mid-level managers that are very hyper-focused on a very particular niche of the GTM or the marketing experience. And it's just, there's a lot more to consider when you're advising people on this. And so anyways, just be wary out there, people. There's a lot of people that think they know what they're talking about, and they'll die before they admit otherwise. And they truly believe it, but they're completely wrong. And you have to be careful when you hire.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's hard to run a business, and
It's so
it gets
hard,
even
man.
harder. It gets even harder when you're in a position where you have to make decisions and you're making the wrong decision.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gets harder. And I don't think it ever gets easier.
Dude, what's the quote of the hardest thing about entrepreneurship? It says, it's harder than you ever thought it was. It's like, it is so, people just don't get, man. It's like, it is so freaking hard. Like, because there's so many little nuances. And the truth is that like any one of these, like if I had made this into a seminar, like a strategic seminar about how to think about these problems, I probably could teach people these frameworks in about 2 to 3 days. But even then, it's like, which lever to pull, right? If I give you all the levers and I put it in the perfect thing, like, here's every single lever. Let's say there's 100 of them. You still have to have a judgment call, and you have to still know when. And it's just like anything. It's like very simple, A or B, the red pill or the blue pill. Which one do you take? And it might seem like at its face value, a very simple decision, but you get that wrong, and every other decision afterwards is like meaningless. And that's where you see these people go 5 years in the wrong direction,
Totally.
and waste their lives. And I'm saying that, I'm not on my soapbox here. I'm that guy. I have done that. I've been like, if I had me 10 years ago, oh my God, I would have saved 5 companies. I would have just not done them. I would have been like, okay, this is a stupid decision. Horrible TAM. We're going to run out of market. I'm going to waste the next 2 years pulling my hair out. So believe me, I'm not preaching at people. I'm commiserating at this point,
Yeah. Yeah. And people can tell that it's coming from a place of truth because you've experienced it. It's not just like something you read or saw online or read someone's post. You've quite literally went through that exact journey.
Yeah.
And
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And yeah. Or, I mean, I like, I'm relatively new to running a business. Like, honestly, only in the last couple of years did I really decide to take have the courage to step into that journey. But the first one I tried, I wasted 2.5 years.
Mhm.
Literally. And it's interesting because like you have this internal dialogue where you really want a specific outcome. So you'll convince yourself that, oh, it's still possible. But like the reality is you would just save so much time if you were to accept the truth for what it is
Mhm.
and just, pivot or, go in a different direction. But people's egos can be fragile, and it's almost like your worst enemy. So if you need to find this balance, because I find that like if you have too fragile of an ego, then people won't really listen to you. They
Mhm.
won't believe you. You have to so it's yeah, there's like so many elements, and that's the reason why entrepreneurship is so hard, because you're juggling so many different elements. It's like you need to be a good decision maker. You need to be able to, hire the right people. You need to, and then on top of that, like there's this personal side to it where you need to manage that. And sometimes, we don't want to owe up to our mistakes and admit to it. And then that just leads you down this path where you're wasting another year or a
Mhm.
year and a half. So yeah, but I feel like you gotta have the right mindset for it.
Mhm.
And even with, I feel like mindset is everything.
Mhm.
So um yeah, I feel like we can go down a serious rabbit hole with this, but
So are you out of time?
no, I'm okay for now.
Yeah,
I
I
was
got
gonna
about 10
say,
minutes left, but yeah, I do wanna finish this thread.
yeah, I was just gonna say, if you have the right mindset, you can't lose.
Mhm.
You either win or you learn.
It's something that I always thought that was curious because I noticed, like, the gurus online, when I would listen to them, they were always talking about frameworks, and they were always talking about values and mindset and belief systems, and I'm like, "Dude, just tactically tell me how to do something. Like, what do you like, just tell me what to do. Like, don't tell me about this mindset, stuff." For the first 4 years, I just thought it was a bunch of BS, and then I just realized it clicked for me a few years ago where it was like, That's all that matters." Because the truth is that, like, if you don't get your core values right, the core level principles and belief systems right, then everything else you do is kind of secondary to that. Because it determines your judgment. It determines why you do things. It determines when you do things, how you do things. And that is to a degree a mindset. A great book, if anyone's like, well, what mindset should I have? Start with Carol Dweck's The Growth Mindset. And it's a great book because it just talks about how there's two fundamental archetypes of people, which is there are the people that have a limited mindset, which are the people that everything that happens to them is a result of their limitedness. So they are perpetually failing because their characteristics are flawed. They came out that way. There's no way they can get better. This is the failure is just proof of their inability and their disability or whatever the issue might be. And it becomes this kind of victim mindset. Whereas the growth mindset is all about, it's the opposite of that. It's that you believe every single mistake and failure, even if you have to make it 5 times in a row, is a new layer of learning. Every single failure is good. Every single thing that you do is good. So I kind of joked earlier, I was like, unfortunately, I've been through it. But the truth is, fortunately, I have been through it. And the thing that where I think this gets into like life coaching kind of, but the truth is that everyone's going to come at every business decision or difficulty with a different level of innate judgment and ability. And you can't judge yourself or oneself against somebody else's innate intuition that just seems to be better. And we look at the Steve Jobs of the world or the Elon Musks. It's like, how did they just get this right? And I think the truth is that some people just have it. So, I mean, I think there just actually is like a spidey sense people have. But I think some of it is you just never know what they went through. You never know what happened earlier in their career, who they were exposed to, or what kind of guidance they got for 5 years in the dark before they were known.
Mhm.
And even I was very impressed with Alfie from Prosp.ai, who I had on my podcast, I think the last podcast. And what impressed me is that it was his first SaaS company, and he had this seems like an obvious thing to some people I'm about to say, but it was not obvious to me when I started, which is he spent a tremendous amount of time on product quality, tremendous amount of time of like really making sure that the product worked, did what it was supposed to do before they launched. And he didn't try to sell vaporware. He didn't try to go, just slap some landing page together and just test the market to see if he could sell it. He actually built the thing right the first time and spent a tremendous amount of effort. Now, that might seem obvious to some people, but depending upon what school of thought you come from, especially if you go to like the lean startup methodology or the 4 steps of the epiphany and the Steve Blanks of the world, they want you to get out there and get an MVP out quickly. Now, anybody listening to this goes, yeah, but an MVP is a fully built skateboard, man, and it does what it's supposed to do. But then you have people like Zuckerberg, who's like, if it's not kind of like embarrassing to ship it, then you haven't shipped soon enough, right? So you get all this competing advice. And my experience generally is that quality over everything. And if that means you have to delay shipment for a month or two, then just delay shipment. Like you can never get your brand back. You're going to get word of mouth growth because you have an amazing product that actually works and it does things better. And so that took, when I used to go to market back in the day, my first several companies, I had a bunch of wireframes and fake Figma type files. I used actually PowerPoint to automate a bunch of screenshots I took of an app once. And I try to show people that. And it's kind of like what Elon Musk says. It's like, until you have something real, people just don't take you seriously. And so that's why Elon Musk's the prototype that has to be really, really high quality before he goes to market because it has to work to a degree. Even if he doesn't have full scale production, he has something that really works. And so I do believe in that. And Alfie seemed to just first company out of the chute just seems to get that right. And I go to myself like, why did that take me 4 companies to get that right? Like what got planted in my brain? What made me wrong about doing that? And I think the truth is maybe he got a mentor, maybe he listened to a different podcast or read a different book that just had that methodology, and you can never know. But these are the fundamentals of like, how do judgments become formed, and why do we make decisions the way that we do? And to my credit, I kind of came to the good side, and I think I'm making the right decision at this point around product development. But it still makes one question themselves, like, what the fuck happened to me? Like, why was I so wrong for so many years on that point? Yeah, and another thing that I've been really bad at is business partner. I have just, for some reason, chosen really bad business partner. And the truth is that I'm more than capable to go on my own, but I convinced myself for years that I needed to have somebody there with me to kind of hold my hand and like we would do this together. Uh, and after so much BS with people just not living to the standard that I want or really having excellence or having high integrity, I just realized like, okay, I'm choosing bad people. What's going on there? Why does this keep reoccurring? Um, so I think as entrepreneurs, I think what it does to us when we go through these business cycles and they try these businesses and we succeed or we fail, it exposes some core hidden beliefs and flaws in our own personality that we have 2 choices. We can either limited mindset, oh no, I'm never going to do it. Like what's the number one fear of an entrepreneur is that they always question whether they were ever capable. And for me, it's like, okay, that's one way to live, or just fuck it, keep going. Like just keep going and just make it happen. So I'm on my 13th company. I've sold one, and I sold one for mid 7 figures. I think it was 6 million. And I only had a minority stake in that. So it's not like I'm sitting here with, gazillion dollars over here. But then we had 2 business acquisitions. And so one of them is valued at more than 7 figures, more than 8 figures. And so, but it took a long time to get to these types of things, right? And so there's no simple path. Everyone has their different way, and I think it's just important for everyone who's listening to this to know, have the growth mindset, pursue life through values you choose, and just keep at it. Like that's the only answer. That's the only answer because some people are going to get there in 6 months, and some are going to get there in 30 years. So who knows which one you are, but the one thing that will make the difference is the perseverance. And I think truthfully, let's say it takes me 30 years to become worth $50 million. I don't know if that's true or not. Let's say that's the case. All the lessons and the person I evolved into is so much more valuable in the long run. Like when I look back and like, do I care if I have 50 million in the bank? No, I care about like all the things that matter to me at a deeper level, which is, was I patient and was I kind? And Did I serve people well? And did I have high integrity? And did I do what I say I was going to do? And those are the things that I think really ultimately matter. But you can't develop those qualities if you haven't persevered and you haven't tried and you haven't set intentionally to be those things. So I don't know. This is a very deep discussion, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, man. I can relate to it. And, I, it's really easy for me to compare myself to other people, especially like, it's kind of interesting because like some of my like mentors or just like, friends who I just feel like I learn a lot from them because they've been doing it for longer and they've accomplished more. But sometimes for me personally, I need to take a step back and just realize where I came from
Mhm,
and, how far along I've gone on my personal journey. And,
mhm,
like even in, going into 2023, I was like $20,000 in debt. And then, 2024 was like the first time I, made well over six figures. And it just making those leaps it reminds me of that quote. I think Abraham Lincoln said this, it said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend 7 hours sharpening my axe. And
mhm.
it felt like that moment, all of those trials and tribulations allowed me to get to that point where I could make that leap. And now, I don't know, maybe I'm naive in a lot of ways, but end goal for Panda Match is to exit.
Mhm.
And you're bringing up a lot of good points, and I got myself questioning. Am I have I built the right foundation? Am I taking on more than I can handle? There's just a lot of questions coming up, and I think one thing that I want the listener to take away from this is if you have access to mentors, use them because they've gone down that path and they can shorten your growth curve by tenfold.
Mhm.
So instead of wasting another 3 to 5 years, you can just cut that down into 6 months,
Yeah.
even more. So, um, this has been a very eye-opening conversation. And yeah, no, it's one of the things I like about this industry and also just being on LinkedIn compared to other social media platforms. Like I find that you can make like real connections because it feels like you're in the trenches together
Mm.
in a lot of ways. So, um, this has been cool, man. Like this is the first time I'm talking to you and just, it feels like, man, like there's just so much I can learn. And in a lot of ways, like I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's, I say to my wife all the time, I have the same feeling because it's like, it's hard to, in the entrepreneurial world, at least, it is hard to find people that are going through the same challenges as us, as these kind of virtual. I don't know if you work in an office, but I work from home where I'm relatively isolated. It's like I show up on camera, I show up on Zoom calls, and I talk to people. But for the most part, it's not like I can walk across the street and have this conversation with someone. It's like
Yeah.
as you try to talk to your mom about this or your best friend from high school. Good luck. It's just like they're gonna like be like, "What are you talking about?" And so, I think it's cathartic to talk to other entrepreneurs and to talk about the real challenges that I think entrepreneurs face. And for me, that's what actually makes me so passionate about the business is that I know how hard, like we were talking about, how hard entrepreneurship is. And it's the old adage of like different levels, different devils, and everybody has their different level. And so for me, my level of like where I like to focus is I've been really successful at getting other people to $1 million to $10 million, right? And I've done it a couple times for us, but it's not easy, right? It's not like it gets easier every time I do it. It's like, okay, maybe I just don't make that mistake, but there's still this really hard road to face. And every time I go on that journey, it feels like I'm like, Frodo from Lord of the Rings. It's like, okay, I'm going on
Yeah.
this journey again. I feel like a Sherpa, it's like where it's like, why does this Sherpa keep going up this hill? And a lot of people think it's like, oh, it's cruel what they do to these Sherpas. If you talk to like the best Sherpas, not that I have, but I've actually watched interviews of various Sherpas, and they like have deep passion for mountain climbing. Some of them become the best mountain climbers in the world. I mean, the question is like, why are you going up that mountain again, man? Like, why are you doing it? Like, that seems crazy. It's like, this is what I do. This is just what I do, you know? And for me, I find real joy in the difficulty of it. It's like, why do you play any hard game? Why do you play golf? Like, you know, why do you go to a tournament? If you're like a 35-year-old guy and you're like in a jujitsu tournament and you're like, why are you going there on the weekend when you can go just sit on the couch? Because there's a challenge and there's like-minded people and you have a community around it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that LinkedIn, I made it a rule to, I spend, I only engage other than on the very rare occasion, I'll make a comment on LinkedIn and Instagram. But for the most part, LinkedIn, I used to be deeply on every other platform. I do post my podcast to YouTube, but I don't actually really rely on that as a social channel. But for me, 99% of my engagement is on LinkedIn because I just realized, okay, like who do I want to be having conversations with in the world? And it's entrepreneurs and people trying to build cool shit and do hard things. And so it's, yeah, I really enjoy it. I think they're my type of people. And so I like to have conversations with people like yourself.
Yeah, man, I feel lucky. And going into I remember it being like 2023. I was like, if I'm gonna survive, like this was around the time deliverability became an issue. I was like, if I'm gonna survive, I'm gonna need solid partners. So and a strong network. And that's something I've always been an advocate of, is just like meet people, get to know them, and try to lead with value first. I feel like if you're a giver, you'll get you might not get further in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to come around. But you also need to balance not being too much of a giver, because then you can be easily taken advantage of. But um, yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of gems out there, and not everyone knows about them, and it's there's really no other way to uh, to find out other than getting involved. And I feel like one thing that really helped me was like paying for mentor.
Hmm.
It's like some people will have a gated calendar link, pay that $200,
Hmm.
and then they take you more serious. They're
Hmm.
like, okay, this guy's like, let me actually help him. He's not just like a random normie, if you will.
That's actually, it's funny you say that because I will notice of all of my lead gen channels, I get a lot of people that just sign up on my link and they just want to shoot the shit with me. And I'm like, okay, I like you, but like I got work to do. I can't spend 30 minutes
Exactly.
here if there's not revenue behind it. And that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but the truth is that time is the most precious commodity. You only have so much of it. And in any given day, 30 minutes is a massive allocation. And honestly, people don't realize that like my hourly is $2,000 an hour. Like I actually get paid $2,000 an hour to go consult. And so when they sign up and they're like, "Hey, I just liked your content. I wanted to talk to you about this idea." I'm just like, and so I think that that's actually a good piece of advice for me is actually maybe I should put up um, that I'm going to put that up now that I think about that. I might from a sales perspective, not charge 2,000. I might like put it up for like 250 and just,
Honestly, I would put it at 750 if they're serious enough, because that's what I did, and that opened up a whole. I would not be here where I am today. It was
interesting.
basically I don't know if you know Jesse Ulett.
No.
Maybe you've seen Lead Magic, founder
Oh,
of Lead
okay.
Magic.
Yeah.
So my intro into like this journey, I was like, I was in his public group,
Mm,
and I was like, yo, this guy offers so much value. I have a very specific problem. I'm just going to pay the 750. I know I'm going to get value in return. And I just did it. And then he ended up inviting me to, one of his like private groups of like growth hackers and whatnot. So, and then that's where I met my co-founder, and it just like opens up so many different doors. So like sometimes just taking those leaps and really like trusting yourself, it gets you to places where you just didn't even imagine. And
Yeah.
I think 250 is too low.
Yeah. No, see, but this is why one, saying stuff into the universe, it sounds woo-woo as hell, but just that little piece of feedback, if you're not open to like just say shit and like sound stupid, like for there, I could be like, well, should I say that? Like I should be guessing, I don't want to come across as not knowing what to do with my LinkedIn link, or just like, fuck it. Like, I don't know. Like right now it's completely ungated. I'm getting really way too many leads. I get a lot of leads, but like they're, maybe 1 out of 10 is good. And frankly, I'm the idiot who I have an SDR team, but I don't send them to the SDR team. So I just send them right to
Yeah.
myself and it's wasting time. So it's a perfect example of you could have somebody who knows all this shit and then me making a simple, stupid mistake that's actually probably costing me an hour and a half a day. So, but it goes to show that we're all on a journey. We all have to learn. We all make mistakes, and these subtle adjustments, these fundamental decisions of like, oh, well, maybe I should put a gate. Well, should it be 250? Oh, but my hourly is 2,000. Like if a hedge fund or somebody, people might want to know why when I get paid 2,000. I get paid 2,000 because I'm a subject matter expert in the oil and gas industry on very specific SaaS related products. Because I'm a multi-time founder there, and so these big hedge funds want to pay me for the market intel. So my hourly for like a lead gen consultation is substantially lower. It's like 1,000 substantially. But still it is. And I only sell those unless I'm like literally going to an event that I'm supposed to speak at. So anyways, if anyone's wondering like where the 2,000 comes from, that's not normal. And it's a funny story, actually. It's kind of like what you just said. You should charge more. I got approached about 7 years ago through, I can't remember the name of the company, but there's these companies that basically broker out experts to these hedge funds who want to do market research. So I get an email and says, "Hey, would you want to talk to this client of mine? They would just need an hour of your time." And I thought it was BS. I was like, sure. How much is it? They're willing to pay $500 for the hour. And I was like, at the time, I was like, what? Like, I was like, that's a lot of money for an hour. I think my hourly was like $100. And so I kind of joked and I was like, no, sorry, it's $1,200. And they were like, okay, we can do that. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? That's crazy. And so I did the hour and then that led to another one, like maybe 2 weeks later. And I was like, it's actually $3,000 because I just wanted to see what they would say. And they're like, we can't do that. We saw you at $1,200 last time. Can you meet us in the middle and do 2,000? And I was like, yeah, let's go, And so then I started doing these consultations every month for $2,000 an hour. And, but it was a good example of how like everyone has a different price point. And I naturally just anchored myself at 250 because I made the judgment call of these people are usually like pre-product market fit entrepreneurs that want to meet with me. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, I was like, but do I want to scare off people that are actually legitimately interested? And the truth is, every time I've ever raised prices, it's always been better. So this is also a good example of how like I could have all that experience and I could still give myself the wrong experience. And this is the Samuel paradox. Who is that? King Solomon, the Solomon paradox of where we give better advice to others than we give to ourselves. So yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I will put it at $1,000.
I would. If the moment you told me 250, I was like, yeah, that's low. Like you'll still get low level, low value leads. Yeah. I mean, and they'll probably get more out of it if they pay more for it. And because you take it more serious. I mean, if you pay something that's like $150, like, and you're making 6 figures, like it's really nothing.
So
But if you pay,
what
like,
did you do? Like, so you did this on LinkedIn. Where did you put your link?
I didn't do it for myself. So when I was breaking into the industry, he had a calendar link and it was gated at 750. But actually, like, he had a really interesting offering. He was like, you can use that 750 toward the lead magic. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, at least, I can do that.
That's a good
So,
idea.
like,
You can use that toward, if you want to work with me afterwards, you can use that towards it. Or if you just want my advice, that's a good idea.
so, and then I did it, and the call, just like, I just added a valuable member to my network, and that, like, to me is worth well over $750.
Yeah. So it's a funny story about, I went to the Alex Hormozy event, and I agree that one of the biggest hacks you can do is go to masterminds. I'm not talking about like larger like conferences. I'm talking about like go find like less than 100 people at an event, ideally less than 50, that's very focused on like your type of people, and go in and just network for 2 days, and you'll find the craziest gems. And so I went in there and I went to Alex Hormozy's event, and it was like all people doing more than $1 million in revenue. That was like you had to be doing that to get into the event. And then there was about, I don't know, 70, 80 people there. And it was kind of surprising. I was kind of wildly unimpressed by some of them. I was like, wow, how are you doing that much revenue? But there were some people that were really impressive. And there was this one guy that came up to me, who I just liked. I liked him. His name was Chris. I'll do a shout out to Chris. And Chris decided he was being sold by Alex on an upsell. So I think the upsell from the $5,000 2-day event was like a $30,000 upsell, and the super upsell was $130,000. And that $130,000 was just a one-time, 1-day event in person with Alex in a conference room talking about your business to find your biggest constraints. And then you got to follow up with his team on 2 separate 2 to 3 day things. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be talking about the offers, but yeah, but that's what it was. And it was just wild, by the way. It's like, whoa, what a fucking funnel. It's like you come in for $5,000 off an ad, and then you get upsold at 30,000, upsold at 130,000 for that. But anyway, so one of the things that they were doing was that they were offering dinners. So for anybody who they thought could do a certain amount of revenue, would be offered this upsell to the $130,000 group. But one thing that I found out they would do is they'd be like, hey, by the way, how long are you staying in Vegas? And I live in Vegas, but they said this to Chris, how long are you staying in Vegas? Why don't you have dinner on us? Yeah. And so Chris comes up to me after the event, and I've only talked to Chris for like 10 minutes. So I'm surprised he liked me that much, but he said, hey, why don't you come to dinner with me, and we'll go get dinner. I'm like, who's paying? He's like, oh, Alex is paying. I'm like, okay, great. So we show up to this restaurant, and it was a perfect example of like completely unexpected entrepreneurial experience that you would never have if you didn't just say yes. And you're like, well, why would you pay $5,000 for a 2-day event? It's to have these types of experiences and networking like this, because you never know how that contact down the line might introduce you to some other guy, or teach you one little thing that opened your mind, or remind you of something you didn't know. So anyways, we go to this event, this dinner, and it was a pretty wild experience. I don't know if I should be saying this on a podcast, but I'll say it anyways because it was funny. And I don't think they give a shit. But the waiter comes up, and they say, what are you having, sir? And I was thinking of getting I think a $75 shot of a Blue Label. And I'm not a big drinker, but I was like, I'm going to splurge here. I'm going to get this. But I wanted to be respectful. And I was like, what's the limit on the tab? Like, I don't want to go over it. And they're like, there's no limit, sir. And I'm like, what do you mean there's no limit? Like, there has to be a limit here. He's like, no, there's no limit. I'm like, okay, what's the most anyone's ever spent at one of these things? And they're like, let me check, sir. And so they're like, oh, you're with Mr. Hormozy. There's no limit, sir. And I'm like, shut up. And so they're like, the most anyone's ever spent is $8,000. And I'm like, really? So I had a good time, man. Like I'm not gonna say how much we spent, but there's some pictures of me having caviar and a couple of wine glasses of, Macallan or whatever the hell. But it was a funny thing where it's like, I met some really cool people, all these awesome entrepreneurs that are more my people than the typical guy that I meet on the street. I had a great dinner that I never would have imagined, and who knows if we'll ever do anything together, Chris and I or any of these other guys. But it was fun, And if these are your people, I just believe, like, go find the people that are like you, that you want to commiserate with, and you want to talk life about, and find those people, because even if you don't achieve the ultimate end goal that you set out, you're going to find friends along the way. And again, I'm going to quote Alex because that seems to be the theme of the podcast. Which is, he says, he quoted a yogi, which was like, in my 20s, I thought it was about the destination. In my 30s, I thought it was about the journey. And in my 40s, I realized it was about the company you keep along the way. And I really thought that was interesting, because I think that's true, is that at the end of the day, like, we're not going to remember anything about like the specific, what did we do on that conference call, Right. But we will remember the people, and we'll remember, it's just like any trilogy of some type of hero journey. It's like you remember the character and the character development and how they treated you and how they made you felt. And so I'll remember that dinner for the rest of my life because it was so unique. It was such a weird thing to be like, I'm going to this event and then I'm going to this uncapped dinner and and it was just special, and it was a fun experience. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds wild. I mean, I can't tell you that I've had a dinner that exceeded like $10,000. Right? Man, I think the most I've ever spent was a few $100.
It wasn't over 2,000. Let's put it that way. But it was one of the more expensive dinners, and that's because I'm a cheap ass. But generally speaking, like I do not like to spend money outside of business. I'm extremely liberal when it comes to poker and business. So I'll go sit down and play 5-10 and, sit there with $5,000, but and I'll go, tomorrow I'll spend $20,000 on some type of event. But when it comes to like personal stuff, I'm very cheap.
Yeah, no, makes sense why you would say poker. I mean, if you're in Vegas,
yeah,
might be a little influence.
I used to play, I don't want to call it like semi-pro, but like, that sounds so stupid. But I played like at least 3 million hands in my life. I used to play like 10 tables.
That's probably to me that's semi-pro.
Yeah,
at least it's definitely not amateur.
Yeah, I was playing. I mean, I was living off of it in my 20s, and even this year, I think I made $40,000 playing poker. But that's only playing like probably like 30 sessions. But I take it seriously, and I have my every session tracked, my profit and loss. But it's just like anything in business. It's all it's judgment, knowing when to pull the trigger, knowing when to make the right move, knowing when to read your opponent. So I actually find it very interesting. So that's a whole nother discussion. But I know we're way over time here. It's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, man. For sure.
Where can people find you online if they wanted to?
LinkedIn, definitely on LinkedIn. I would say, Aviv Joseph Glazer on LinkedIn. LinkedIn-in-Aviv Joseph. I have a Twitter for Panda Match. Don't really use it. Probably will, hopefully this year, but it's just really not a focus right now because we're just putting a lot of our efforts into product. But yeah, LinkedIn, probably the easiest place.
Okay. And then what can you say the name of the website again?
pandamatch.io. If you quite literally just type in Panda Match on Google, you're going to find us.
Okay, great. So everyone go check out Panda Match and give these guys some support. And we'll see everyone on the flip side on the next podcast of Next Gen Sales Leaders. See you guys. Thanks.